Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm going to try something new. I'm doing a weekly reads, and it is the 7th exactly today, so it will be exactly a week. I have read 16 books, some of which are very small, which is why it's 16. First off, I want to talk about 3 Dreams in the Key of G by Marc Nash. This video is 100% out by this time. I know it came out a few days ago. This is a fantastic book. It's a book of ideas, a book about language. It is dense sometimes, but well worth the effort. It will definitely elicit a lot of thoughts, and it's just a lot of fun. There's a lot of joy in the language. It's exceptional. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. Then I read the first volume of The World of Black Hammer, the oversized edition that I borrowed from my brother. If you've never read an oversized edition, I highly recommend it. It's fantastic. In Dark Horse Comics, they call it the library edition. It's like a completely different reading experience. It's very fun. I toyed with the idea of blowing up some of my own books because they're published in graphic novel size. It's the largest you can go for single column text, essentially, which I like. But at that point, with a game book, it's not very practical to have it as a reference material at that point. So, and it's harder to ship, probably heavier, etc., etc. The World of Black Hammer is really interesting because it is a tandem piece to Black Hammer itself. While the superheroes in Black Hammer have fought a anti-god, is what the person is, the supervillain is called. Everybody thinks they are dead. There was like a huge explosion. And in Black Hammer Volume 1, we find out that they're not dead. They're in a sort of micro world, and they're trying to make sense of that. Some of their powers work, some of them don't. A lot of different things are happening. World of Black Hammer goes into some of the backstory that has been brought out from the first volume, and focuses on 2 characters in particular. In one, Black Hammer's daughter is a reporter trying to figure stuff out, and in the other one, it's Dr. Andromeda, who is a, I don't know, kind of Green Lantern-esque type superhero who is a scientist who invents a bunch of technology and keeps prioritizing, of course, superheroism over his family and the repercussions of it. The nice thing about Black Hammer, if you've never read it, is it takes these archetypes and sort of inverts them or spins them around or looks at them like a little bit different, and it makes it sort of like new and fresh again, even though it's recognizable. It conveys different information than what the archetypical stories that we have internalized from Marvel and DC and Image and stuff like that does. And I think it's really brilliant. It's great. This is more cohesive and complete than the first volume of Black Hammer, which ends on a cliffhanger in which they don't really tell you everything, which is annoying. And these volumes are meant to alternate between Black Hammer and World of Black Hammer. So the next book I'll read is now the 2nd volume of the main Black Hammer verse. I gave it 4 stars. I thought it was great. Next I read Network Effect, the Murderbot novel. So it's not a novella, it's the first novel. This was great. I'm not going to say too much about it just because it's Murderbot. People talk about it a lot. It is what it is. If you've gotten to the 5th book, you know what Murderbot is about, and this is that. I will say the novella format is, for me, better. It's more tight. The pacing is better, and it still conveyed the same amount of like philosophical and sociological things. It's subversive cyberpunk 100%. I love that the protagonist is agender. It always tries to center marginalized people, and it always does a little bit of world building. So it's just sort of nice bite-sized sci-fi, basically. I also read the 6th book, the novella that came out after, which I don't have. I consumed it on audio, and I was warned beforehand, thanks to Rosie Cockshut, I think her name is, I'll link her channel below. She was talking about it, and she mentioned that it was very weird because it takes place before the novella, actually. So being warned of that, I think it did help me like it quite a bit more, because it would have been really weird and jarring otherwise. And it centers on Murderbot solving a little murder mystery type thing on the location where they were before the events of the novella take place. So that's why it's very jarring. The novel changes a whole bunch of stuff, and so it feels like quite the regression if you don't see that coming. And it was just like a fun murder mystery, which I'm all about already. So it did not have the same sociological and philosophical components that I liked, but I maybe not equally, but I also enjoy that type of genre, and I thought it was done well and sort of was quite organic. So both of the stories got 4 stars from me, both the novel and the novella. Next, I read The Heart Principle, which is the Kiss Quotient 3rd book, and I quite liked it. It probably is my favorite one of all of them, even though it's a little bit all over the place sometimes. I think it worked more for me. Basically, in this one, we have a neurodivergent person on the spectrum, diagnosed later in life. She was with a piece of shit partner before, who wants to explore his options and knows that she's not very interested in sex because he's shitty at it, basically. And so he goes off and sleeps with people, and they're in an open relationship. She starts seeing through a dating app Hoang, who is a character from the previous novel that is much loved in the fandom. He and her strike up a relationship that is way more organic than the 2 previous books, in my opinion, and I liked it a lot. It doesn't hinge so much as in sex, and it's more seeing them get to know each other and foster intimacy in other ways, which personally I like more. Anna is having a bunch of personal issues, including the diagnosis that she's working through. Her father is ill. Her family dynamics are really toxic for her because she's been masking her neurodiversity for so long that it's sort of like consumed her, and she doesn't know who she is without it. And whenever she tries to get rid of the masking, they are inevitably like set upon her as being a jerk and not centering them, not performing her role in the family, not performing her gender, a lot of stuff like that. So it's probably the heaviest book, I would bet. There's a lot of different turns the narrative takes, but the characterization is great, dialogue is great. The romance for me above and beyond the other 2 for sure. And the overall story is just something that I like, because you can tell that the intimacy fostered in this way is not like a typical romance where if you were to view them 1 year later, who knows where they would be. This feels more like a situation where they really find out if they work through, bad times first and then go from there, which, is interesting, different than the previous books, and seems more realistic to me. Next, I read The Octopus Has 3 Hearts. I returned this to the library already, or I would show you. The picture should be there, though. This is for the Giller Prize books that I've been doing. This is another one that I DNF'd, unfortunately. I did not like it. I have specific reservations about it, but I think the reasons why I didn't like it will definitely be reasons why other people would like it and pick it up. So stick around for that. Next, I read Filthy Animals by Brendan Taylor. This was better than real life for me. It centers on one specific character for most of it, but then jumps to different short stories interspersed. The sort of thesis of this is that it's a group portrait of young adults enmeshed in desire and violence, a hotly charged, deeply satisfying new work of fiction. And I think it does do that. It was almost 5 stars for me, but the problem is that I felt that the first character that we meet, who is a dancer and dealing with these like pretty toxic people, and also dealing with his own internalized toxicity, lead to like these really interesting and charged situations. Brendan Taylor describes body and body movements and like the art of performing a very physical sport, and the physicality of those around him, and what sort of the dimensions of interacting with those people are, both in the, I don't know, sport or the performance of dancing, as well as like sex, intimacy, getting to know people, the way that people who have been traumatized are often susceptible and vulnerable to people who can see that and can take advantage of them. So it's very interested in a lot of like complex intricacies that sometimes it nails, sometimes it'll make you very squeamish, but I think it's territory well worth exploring and done well. And overall, all of the characters, but especially that one person, was super compelling. I really liked it. I rated it 4 stars, and like I said, almost 5 stars for me, but there were other stories where it was hard to connect to, and I constantly wanted to get back to that main story, basically. Next, I read a psychological thriller, 29 Seconds by T.M. Logan. This is a book that attempts to examine misogyny and, to some degree, white supremacy in academic spaces, but mostly misogyny and the ways in which completely toxic, bad actors and manipulative men navigate that space and co-opt it to their own desires, away from specifically the protagonist in this, a woman. She is working up to get tenure and is constantly thwarted by this particular guy who pretty much makes it known that if she, acquiesces to his desires, then, that would be the actual trajectory path to tenure. And when she rebuffs him, bad things start happening in her life. Then on the way home, she sees an attempted kidnapping, is what it looks like, and she intervenes, and as a result, long story short, the father of the girl that was being taken is thankful and tells her that she can name anybody that she knows to disappear. Just, they're gone, dead, whatever. And at first, of course, she doesn't. We know she is going to do so as the reader eventually, and we know exactly who she's going to target. As a result of the targeting, her life starts to unravel in predictable ways, I would say. It's not too psychological. It is commercial fiction. In the end, I ended up giving it 2 stars. I didn't like it. The pacing is way off for this thing. It feels like it takes forever for that between her undeciding and her decision, and then the sort of unraveling of it feels like it's forever, basically, even though it's commercial fiction and paced like a thriller. So every 3 or 4 pages we're changing it. It has some interesting things about like gender dynamics and the way that women are pressured to again, like, be co-opted by male people to further their own aims and like perpetuate the patriarchy, essentially. But it feels so solipsistic in the sense that, I use that word a lot and I should probably codify it. Everything outside of her head feels like it isn't real, basically. Like, it doesn't feel well realized. The dialogue is hammy and terrible at times. The overall concept, though it could be interesting, is executed in a way that makes it unbelievable and contrived. And it does a lot of work making sure that the reader thinks that everybody's incompetent, such that the end is like a deus ex machina, and like suddenly everybody is competent, and like this very convoluted plan that's contrived only because we are not told of it. It cuts scenes specifically so that you don't know. And while that somewhat generates anticipation, it doesn't actually do the work of building to a payoff that seems believable. Next, I read Harlem Shuffle by Colson Whitehead. Boy, is this a book to consume on audio. The narrator is Dion Graham, and that guy knocked it out of the park. Like, the prose feels like it would be kind of strange to consume on the paper, and I think maybe that's the weirdness that some people experience when they consume it, because the book is fairly polarizing at the moment. But I found it just completely engrossing, even when it's strange. For instance, at one point, a character is thinking that somebody is like burning a hole in their back, so they turn around, even though they are sort of afraid of what might be back there, and they're, you know, fearing for their safety because they're in Harlem. They look back, and it's just a woman who gives him the eye of like, why are you being creepy? Why are you doing this? And then it sort of like breaks the fourth wall a little bit, and he's like, that's why you don't look back. And I found it just kind of worked, like the delivery from the actors, the thing that pulled it off. Whereas if I was consuming it in the book, I'm not so sure. But this book is, for one, I think like the most compelling voice that has been created by Colson Whitehead, even though, like I said, it probably needs to be consumed on audio, or maybe you just get it, like maybe you just fall into the cadence and it doesn't matter. Some people definitely didn't from the reviews that I saw, though. It paints a picture of Harlem at a time when there's a lot of like civil unrest. There's it feels like it is meticulously researched. There's so much amazing description and the prose rooted in time and place, including vernacular, diction, jargon, the descriptions of actual landmarks, how it feels to navigate the place. Everything like that was completely perfect. It also sort of wants to be the crime plot happening, though, as it jumps between different characters. And basically there's like a job that goes wrong and there's fallout from that. It's very simplistic in that, and I think that's where it trips up a bit. Everything else feels very literary, very well thought out, whereas the plot feels like it is a ham-fisted, somewhat vehicle to convey all of this amazing information. And I didn't really care about the plot, as you can tell, like I brush right over it, but I think this is a book for me to reread physically now that I have the voice in my head from that actor conveying it so well. And so I think I will pick it up at some point and consume it that way, and then maybe the plot will, you know, stick with me more. I gave it 4 stars. I liked it a lot. Had the plot been more developed, or had I consumed it in a way that the plot elements were conveyed to me more, because I do think the audio makes it more difficult to stick to those things. Whenever there's the more interesting aspects, especially the description, tend to like have swept away the elements of the characters and plot that I weren't that interested in. And then I just ended up not caring because it would just be a description of an alley that was incredible or something. So I definitely need to reread it, and then it might be a 5-star read. Next, I read A Dream of a Woman by Casey Plett. This is another Giller Prize book, so I will do a review on it. This is a transgender author who has made a short story collection centering trans women, and it is exceptional. I gave it 5 stars. I loved it. The smart thing that this collection does, I'll quickly say, is it plots a short story that goes as a through line through the entire book, of course. So it is broken up over 3 or 4 parts. And so anytime you kind of consume a story that is maybe not as good, or a little bit incongruent, or less cohesive, because I think some of these stories were published elsewhere, but then compiled into this. Right after it, you have the through line story that is exceptional. And as you might expect with the transgender author, she's aware of the normal pitfalls, the marginalization, the fetishization of trans women in fiction. None of that happens. It is contemporary, not literary fiction. It's accessible. The characters are brilliant. It doesn't resort to normal cis type conflict into books. It's great. Then for IndigAthon, I read this book, which is really short, you'll see. So I wasn't aware that this series was compiled like that. This is the Pemmican Wars, A Girl Called Echo, Volume 1. Katharina Vermette, who most people would know from The Break, and her newest novel, The Strangers, winning the Writers' Trust Prize. I think that's what it's called. The one sponsored by Atwood and her husband Gibson, I think. It just sets up Echo herself in school. It's really hard to rate because it's all set up. I would have preferred to consume a graphic novel that compiled all of them maybe. But as it is, I gave it 3 stars because it's just, there's not much going on. I know the character, I know that they're in school, I know they're Métis and learning about Métis history, and she has a very vivid imagination that propels her into the past and experiences them sort of firsthand in a shorthand of like intergenerational conflict and memories and damage, I think, is what is being conveyed, but it's not explicit. And at the end, she gets to see her mother, who says that she never learned about her people either, and it's over. So, you know, what can you take away from that? I think it's a decent setup. I'm going to definitely consume the other volumes. There's up to 4 now, and I think they're all pretty short like this, like 40 to 60 pages. Next, I consumed The Taste My Life Through Foods by Stanley Tucci. This is a memoir, and I'm doing a lot of nonfiction for Nonfiction November. A lot of them are going to be memoirs. I love Stanley Tucci. I wouldn't say this is particularly erudite. It's contemporary. It's a memoir. It's exactly what you would expect from Stanley Tucci. It's very interesting if you're interested in him. His family is kind of cool. Learning about different pasta and his very specific dishes that he gives throughout is pretty interesting to ground the fiction in that stuff. And him talking about his childhood, his mother, and what food is to him was all really good. I liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Next, I tried to consume a different memoir of somebody that I didn't know whatsoever, and that backfired. I gave it 1 star. I DNF'd it at 20%. It just didn't matter to me. And it made it so that it really communicated to me that if I'm going to consume a memoir, a celebrity memoir, it needs to be somebody that I already kind of give a damn about and want to hear about and whatnot, which makes sense. It was sort of an experiment. That is The Storyteller, Tales of Life and Music by David Grohl, I think is how you pronounce it. I think this guy is from like the Foo Fighters. I don't know anything about the Foo Fighters. His life was very like exactly how you think a child would get into drumming would be, and how exactly you think a young kid would fall in love with a girl. You know, it was fine. It was exactly what you'd expect from a white guy who starts drumming, basically. Next, I read The Phone Booth at the Edge of the World by Laura Messina. The narrator is Yuri Naka, and the translator is Lucy Rand. Hopefully that is correct. But this felt very Midnight Library, and it's like trying to be, again, sort of after-school special, convey very prescriptive life advice. It's like the intersection of self-help and literary fiction / contemporary fiction for me that I really don't like generally. I gave this 3 stars. It was fine. It had an interesting metaphor for communicating with grief, looking inward, particular paths towards grieving, and the story was overall sort of fine, as were the characters, but I really didn't like the prescriptive elements of it, so it kind of came out to a wash. Next, just today I finished This Place, 150 Years Retold, a graphic novel. This is a compilation of stories by Indigenous people, both illustrators and writers. It is quite simplistic, accessible, and for all ages. It won't, get a sophisticated adult's sort of reader palette excitable, but it does communicate a whole whack of facts in a very easy way. Each story has like a little timeline of different things that the indigenous people had to endure from Canada and the government, and sometimes before the government. And then there'd be a little introduction about what story you're going to read, and then consume the actual, like, you know, normal 24-page spread or whatever of that particular story. It ranges from like just before the government to a speculative fiction that is beyond the years of Canada now and sort of where it's going, and sort of is a good examination of decolonization and colonization and the interactions therein by people who are holding those respective ideologies. I thought the dialogue was very simplistic. It's often trying to do info dumps, but also I think that kind of comes with the territory. When you read what the book is about and you enter it in the spirit of that and interact with it in the way that you want, I think you'll get exactly what you expected. There's a lot of original content. The fact that everything is backed up by facts and a specific timeline for each story, of which there is like 8 or 10 or something, is fantastic. I gave it 5 stars. It should be required reading basically in junior high-ish age, I think is what would be perfect. And the last book I want to talk about is The Trees by Percival Everett, which was fantastic, but in a strange way. I'm gonna film a completely separate video on The Trees. Just know that I loved it. I gave it 5 stars. It's a surrealistic, emphasis on surrealistic, crime fiction book centering Black voices by a Black author, talking about socio-political issues, namely racism, institutional racism, including individuals, many individuals, patriarchy, white supremacy underlined. In some ways it's a very strange read. It's a pretty bold read. It's pretty different. I didn't really connect all of the dots until the end of the book and it was over, which was always a nice sort of punctuation mark at the end of a book. And I also thought it was really interesting the way that it manages to sort of flip the script on the crime aspects of the plot as it goes. It turns up the surrealism very slowly, and so you're sort of lulled from a very realistic depiction of the South to something else. And that is my wrap up. If you have any questions, thoughts, queries, whatever, have them in the comments and we'll have a little chat.